I'd like to call the Academic Standards and Curriculum Committee meeting to order. Welcome and thank you for attending today. So our first item of business is the approval of the November 18th, 2020 minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. All four?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So approved. Takes us to the administrative report. Dr. Krauser.
But thank you. Good evening, everybody. Just glad to see, and Mr. Robinson and I were having the conversation. It was good to start a day without precipitation, so it was nice to see everyone safely arriving us tonight on Zoom. We do have a nice list of activities and discussions for this evening. The first item on our administrative report is our top survey results. A couple items regarding the top survey that I'd like to share before we kind of discuss them or answer any questions you might have. If you recall from our prior meeting, we were seeking mid-year feedback from our top students. Those are our Trojan Online Pathways. The survey was disseminated near the end of December, beginning of January for our data collection. We chose to collect data in a slightly different fashion in this particular survey to try to get a more authentic assessment of our participants. In normal surveying situations, what we were finding is we were sending out our data in a survey form, and as oftentimes is the case, the same individuals were really diligent and really good about responding back in the surveys, which may have led to some influence. So we decided to be a little bit more scientific in this particular sample to try to get a more randomized sample. So what we did was, and you'll see it in the notations, we basically took each grade level section and broke it into a 20 to 25% sample. And we randomly selected participants in the top program within that sample. And then we made diligent efforts to ensure their participation. We first sent an email, then we followed up with a phone call with repeated emails until we could get a greater sample of a definitive randomized sample of participants. So the number of sample participants is somewhat smaller, but it's a lot truer informed to a random sample of our top students that we sometimes had to track down to get answers to. So we appreciate their participation. And again, given that we've had some recent changes to the health and safety plan and top enrollment, you do see some changes to this data even as early as now. When we took this survey, as I said, it was early in the semester, the beginning of January. So you can kind of see some big takeaways from that. We have immediately, once the data was collected, we have been using that at the building level to address some of the questions and items that came up. So with that, I'll leave it open to questions that you might have for myself or Dr. Ketterman or the building administrators that are present.
Sure, thank you. And what percentage response did you get when you did this different approach?
Well, in some areas we ended up with 100%. So for example, you can see in the grade K to 2, we ended, 8 out of 8, 11 out of 9 out of 10. We struggled a little bit more at the secondary level, which is not uncommon, that the participation rate dropped off slightly, but we did feel a little bit more confident that we were getting a true randomized sample of participants for this particular kind of mid-year check.
Mm-hmm. I have one question or observation. I mean, the big question is, what are the lessons that you get from this data? Let me throw out one thought, and then maybe you could reflect on whether you think there's anything to this thought and what other lessons you take out. Okay, so the thought is that there was a lot of dissatisfaction, and in the face of this dissatisfaction, there was still, in my mind, a higher percentage than I would have thought that said they would still consider doing this were there no COVID, which could be interpreted, if I'm reading this correctly, as there's a pretty strong desire for this program. So the fact that there were this many people that would even consider it, given the level of dissatisfaction, consider doing it again, then it might be a much higher number in a future round. Okay, so don't know, but would like you to reflect on those sorts of interpretations of the data.
Sure. I'll be happy to go first, and then I'm going to also allow Dr. Ketterman and any building administrator to apply as well. great question. We did talk about that satisfaction. I think it did a couple things. Number one, it did provide a confirmation and affirmation to us as an organization. Through the comprehensive plan, we vetted out that we needed to move a process forward to provide alternatives for students besides the traditional schooling approach. And this, as you mentioned, does confirm that there is an interest to have this level of choice and agency in students' choices as they move through school. And it is something that we certainly want to continue to enhance and enrich as we move through. At the high school, Dr. Ellis and his program, we're doing some of this at a smaller scale. We're allowing to expand on that at a greater point. Some of the big takeaways, and I'll start at the middle school in particular, that was one conversation that Dr. Snedden and I had with his data. It allowed for him to see that his team, let me scroll down to the middle school to kind of give you a sense, appreciated the flexibility, but we're seeking more of a teacher interaction than the completely asynchronous approach. So he's been working with his team to see how that might be adjusted to apply some of those strategies as they move through the second half of the year. That was one example of the lesson learned. We did see a response that people did appreciate the flexibility, but they also wanted a little bit more involvement in that, what we'll call that synchronous time or the streaming time.
Dr. Krauser?
Yes.
I really hate to interrupt you, but I'm looking at your legend at the bottom, and it's backwards. Blue is 1 and 5 is red. The top is...
You are correct, sir.
Hi, this is Steve. Am I correct in inferring from that the Halloween colors are dissatisfaction numbers?
The green and
The
orange,
green and the orange?
the tops are the satisfaction.
Or the satisfaction, right?
Is the most satisfied.
But I want
The
to make
blue
sure.
is a 1, the least satisfied.
Yeah, that is a misprint. I apologize for that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Henry.
That's
Yeah,
critical.
so I want to make sure I
It literally
I'm-
flips
Wait
the
a minute,
graph upside down.
So are you saying that,
Yeah,
just go ahead and clarify, please?
yes, clarify that again.
The legend across the bottom is in reverse order. The
God almighty.
dissatisfied is at the bottom, and the satisfied would be the orange on top.
Oh,
My
So,
God,
like, as
I
you
mean, I
scroll
gotta
back
tell
to
you,
the
Scott,
one-
that's a significant error and it caused a significant waste of time on my part. I'm not sure who else, but that's very concerning that somebody didn't catch that earlier. I mean, it really
Yeah.
completely reverses the takeaway from these charts.
Yeah, correct. Our apologies for that. Yep.
Let's move on.
okay. So then the comment that I had earlier, so it's actually the inverse of what I said.
Right. Satisfaction was pretty high. Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, again, we apologize for that. We will edit that out and get that corrected immediately.
Okay, so then to continue though. So reversing my observation then, it's that when you ask the question of would you consider this had there been no COVID? All right, now how do you compare then those responses to satisfaction levels? Right, I'd said it's a bit of surprise, but now with this, now that I understand what the data is saying, would you now say it's consistent?
Correct. That individuals were seeking opportunities to find alternatives.
Mhm. Okay, well then to finish the thought that you had started with Dr. Snedden in the middle school.
And again, that was one example. You had asked to provide an example.
Right.
That was one example. I don't know if Dr. Ketterman would share one at the elementary level. And again, I apologize that we're having to reverse your eyes on our legend. Again, apologize for that error.
Yeah, I would just say that, yeah, when we looked over it and it was shared with teachers, and so they were able to make some changes right away. One of the big things, of course, we looked at was teacher interaction, although again, it wasn't, it was still strongly satisfied, but that was something that they knew they could add more synchronous times. And then just also communication was something that we took away that we could, try to improve.
And I don't know, since Dr. Ellis is here, I don't want to speak for him. If there's any comments you had too as well, Dr. Ellis?
No, I don't have anything specific. I think the results of the high school are a little bit different than the ones at the middle school, that we sort of had an even distribution of the impression that the modes that everyone wanted to have. There were people that would prefer to be 100% live, while others would prefer to be 100% offline and asynchronous. So I think we're hitting sort of that middle ground right now of offering a little bit of everything that they're looking to. Certainly, I was hoping that the responses to the BYU courses would be a little bit more positive than they were. It is one of the challenges with many offerings as we have at the high school to try to replicate that, and we've had to rely on them. But it gives a little bit of pause in terms of trying to make sure we streamline some of those options for students as well.
Any other questions for Dr. Krauser on the survey?
Just confirming the error that was mentioned earlier with regard, that is only, the error is only with the middle school, or is that across the board?
It is the
Across the board.
Yeah, it's across it's written on the bottom of the bar
Okay.
on the bars.
Understood then. Thank you.
And again, we apologize for that.
Dr. Krauser, I have a question. When people signed up for TOP program, were they given the impression that they would get the same amount of interaction with teachers that they had when the children were in school regularly face-to-face with teachers? Or how was that explained to them? Explain that.
No, it was marketed as an asynchronous cyber program, that it's, very clearly not the forward learning that we saw in the spring where, teachers were synchronously teaching class all day long. It was an asynchronous program. We have been adapting and morphing that in a variety of different ways. Some classes do certain parts of the day in a synchronous session. Some are running individual synchronous sessions in small groups. Dr. Ellis is blending some classes. There's a mixture of both. So it is a combination. We've morphed that in a way to try to meet the needs of individual students, as well as meet the needs and certainly by their age and group.
I was just wondering, because when people think of this as sort of a la what, a cyber charter school is like, those, basically they study on their own, and there's not, we have the opportunity then to make these classes more a la York Suburban style. Is that correct? Than some other cyber choices.
Correct. And I would say certain cyber programs do have a range. Some are 100% asynchronous. Certain cyber programs are somewhat of a combination as well. They too have a variety of options that they offer through their school.
Okay, thank you.
Let me jump in here, please. And again, I'm trying to get the colors straight as well, but regardless, okay, you've got the survey data. I wasn't clear what I get the interest takeaway, but in reality, what is this telling you about the TOP program? In other words, are there things that are supporting changes going forward? Are there things that this is building into that will support changes going forward? I'm not clear on what this is telling me.
Well, good question. Yes, we're using it first as kind of a monitoring tool to see what their overall experience is, and then really dive into communication. So to what degree have we learned that The performance of the students is on par to some of the questions that have been asked before. So, has the assessments that are being reported in child's earning in the program been on par with prior experiences? What are we doing with regards to the communication we receive from the teachers? So both at an individual level and a class level, how is that communication being received, and how would we rate that so we can determine if we need to adjust that communication scale from teachers? Again, we talked about the flexibility within that, how flexible it is in an asynchronous setting versus the flexibility of a synchronous setting. How satisfied are they with the overall experience in teacher time in that particular course? So yes, we use those to make some immediate changes that we could in certain levels and certain responses based on that particular teacher and that particular grade. Because again, at the elementary level, a top teacher runs a particular grade at the elementary, and then at the middle school, it's a team of teachers that separate that out. And then at the high school, Dr. Ellis has a combination of a variety of things, both teachers as well as kind of split sections.
So you mentioned you made some changes. Is there anything you can share?
I mean, I can speak specifically. I know that at the middle school, Dr. Snedden and his team try to work an opportunity that they could have more experience with the teachers to provide time with those students. That was one particular change from the middle level.
And I can share two from the elementary level that have morphed over time. One being the amount of flexibility. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. It's coming across so choppy in my ears. As Dr. Krauser said, we started with it being all asynchronous, and we quickly learned that the young ones need much more structure, need more parameters, need more boundaries. So, their assignments are now due within the week. We do give an additional week for, cases who need more time. But it's not as open as a 9-week period or a month period. And then the second thing is again, just that desire. There are definitely some people who like to be all asynchronous, but there are some who really want that face-to-face communication and that instruction with the teacher. So most of the elementary teachers are offering, a 30-minute, 40-minute, 10 o'clock, there's reading group that, again, they would come in, they come if they want or if they need to. There's certain students they're inviting, you should really start coming to my reading sessions at 10 o'clock. And at 11 o'clock, there's a math session to come in. So we definitely have made more opportunities for synchronous instruction to take place.
So just so I make sure I'm looking at this properly, if I look at the K-2 top parent survey responses, and let's say overall educational experience provided by the Trojan Online Pathways, the green and the orange 1 and 2 would be dissatisfied or satisfied?
Satisfied.
So they're overwhelmingly satisfied with it, yet they're not satisfied with the synchronous versus asynchronous.
Well, if you see, it's kind of, well, the synchronous versus asynchronous, it's kind of almost, a quarter. They're pretty split. I mean, that's what we're finding. There are some people who truly want the cyber type program, and I think are some people who are in this program because they're not comfortable coming to school. So they want as much in-person time, and their students may need as much in-person time as possible.
I would echo that.
And last question, and I'm done. Those that would keep their kids in, regardless of the pandemic, have you kind of extrapolated that to get maybe a percentage of the total student population that would continue on with it for planning purposes?
I don't feel like we're there yet. We intend to do that closer to the end of the year when people may have a little, when we all may better have a little better feeling of where things are, in relation to COVID. Again, what we have is what's on the, the second page of each division. Well, but you can't even, that's, that was, again, their take on whether or not they would participate in a COVID-free year. And that was back in, we took this in January, I believe.
So if I may add to that, as of right now, as we're beginning to collect the data from the transition at the elementary level to return to a 4-day, we're getting some of that now in a real time setup about the number of students that plan to return, that are leaving top to come back to in-person learning, which at this point we would hypothesize either one, they were choosing this option either as a, could have been a hurdle because they couldn't find daycare, and the only other option was to be a top versus a completely safe, because we are seeing students that are leaving top to return all in. So they're choosing to leave the top and return to the 4-day.
Right. So are those students then, like the numbers, are they kind of supporting what you're seeing from your survey results at the K-5 level?
I would say, well, we've had 33 students that are coming back, and that might have grown a little bit. But again, when you look at the survey, so no, it's not 60% of them or so coming back, Yeah. So I think there's still the pandemic is still playing a part of that.
So Tom, 33 of how many?
We had 251 elementary, this is just elementary I'm speaking of, top kids. And now with our recent survey, 33 have said they're coming back on March 1st.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
Dr. Monis, did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
I was going to add just some qualitative information just from the experience at Valley View. It's 1/4 of the elementary, but to Dr. Skelet's comment, I'm most interested, Dr. Skelet, in that middle of the road group, because I do think you have one side of the population that has found a schooling that is of interest to them based on their family situation. On the other side, you have a group that decided based on pandemic, based on current conditions, and they were giving it a try. That middle of the road group, I am wondering if we're going to have people making a decision, choosing one side of the fence or the other. So that will be interesting. But my general conversations have been sort of a love it or I want to come back all in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
It kind of surprises me that the numbers are so low with the people that want to come back. With all of the screaming about going back in, it seems lower than I would have expected.
Yeah.
And I can share just one example of a conversation where I had where a family made the decision, I suppose now based on the last 10 weeks. They said, we're in a routine, we're going to keep it for the last 10 weeks. They may have decided otherwise, and this particular family would come back in the fall should we be all open.
Yeah, well, I guess that makes sense, but I guess with all the screaming we saw online about coming back, I would have thought the number would have been much higher.
Well, that's two different groups. The group that we're seeing are only top students. I think a lot of the ones that you're referencing that were commenting online were those that were in the hybrid model.
True.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah, and the other thing, the number I shared, I forgot to net out, there were 6 students in elementary who have chosen to move to top on March 1st. And the 33 was actually the net. So we're a little closer to 40 that have, 39 that have chosen to leave top to come to in-person.
So then that takeaway is those 6 families were leery of a daily school routine. So they are going to stay home and do top. And did I understand that? Those 6 families, did I understand that right?
Yeah, 6 families. I'm not sure if they were leery of the daily or if it was the change in distancing and whatnot, the routines that would need to change as a result.
Steve Sullivan here. Sorry if this was answered previously. Are we entitled to any satisfaction reporting from Pennsylvania Cyber Charter? And if so, does it map to any of these categories for comparability's sake?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of it, but it's certainly something I can try to investigate. My hunch would be that that would be an independent process. I don't know if they have to report that. Maybe Dr. Williams would know more on that, but I don't believe they're required to report those satisfaction rates. Given what they don't have to report anything at a cyber charter, I would doubt they're reporting that, but I can certainly investigate.
No, they don't.
All that money and no accountability.
Nope.
Yep.
That sums it up.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
I have a question. I'm not sure if this is the perfect time to throw it in, but I'm going to. I suspect, as is the case with anything new, given that TOP was so new, have we administratively reflected on how to roll it out differently? I have learned just anecdotally that there were some misunderstandings, a little bit of communication issue with what TOP was going to be.
Yeah.
And I would like to see us benefit from a survey like this. You know, we thought we knew what we were saying, but it wasn't received that way. And have we benefited from that? And given a rollout next fall, did we benefit from that? You could speak to that a little bit. And I don't know which administrator would be most knowledgeable of that, but I'm just curious about that.
I'd be happy to comment on it first and open it to others. Reflecting administratively, I would say absolutely. We're doing it constantly and have been doing it. I would also say we really didn't roll out our cyber program as we would have designed through a 2-3 year institution. We rolled out an alternative to deal with a global pandemic where people didn't want to come to school. So you're spot on, Ms. Schrader, where the rollout wasn't at all what we would have hoped. The product that we could produce wasn't all we could hope, but we tried to ensure a few things. Number one, that we had a safe option for families at Suburban that were rooted in a curriculum that we could produce internally, and that those families could have an option to toggle back and forth without having to leave the district. So that was our effort to organize, basically build an entire school in roughly about a month and a half to get it underway. Moving forward to roll it out again, it requires a lot of work. And really, and again, by design, if we're building a school, we did it as in a frugal fashion as best we could, because the finances in the beginning weren't there. We did get some COVID relief, but when the initial planning was underway, we didn't have it. I think moving forward, we have to really vet out how much of the investment of the district can put in, because it's going to require investments to move the program to be in a competitive state against available options. If we're competing against a cyber program that's operating, to use Dr. Sullivan's comment, with all that money, what do we make internally? How can we do that internally? So yeah, we're doing a lot of reflecting and really starting to step back out. What would be an optimal program that we could offer for a Trojan Online pathway moving forward, both adhering to our curriculum, but again, providing some opportunities that we can't match internally. We just couldn't produce that much curriculum for an entire school system in a short period of time. So first and foremost, absolutely, we own that. It wasn't an ideal scenario. It was what we could do to best offer those options for our families, because we knew it was our necessary need to do that for the families.
Right, understood. And I think you know me well enough to know, Scott, that not at all critical. I'm just always benefiting on reflecting and how we can do a better job is what I'm driving at. So thank you.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think one of the things that we've been planning through the spring, and certainly at a secondary level and with Dr. Ketterman, what's that going to look like moving forward? What can we operate with some of these, this feedback? So for example, Mr. Sanders talked about what we learned from that. We learned that families that want to participate in more of a synchronous setting, we need to have better high quality production. So as we started to build and prepare budgetary items, we need to upgrade our camera systems. What can we do to really make that learning experience? So we're using the data, we're reflecting, and no, I appreciate your comments and well received. Thank you.
Scott, this is Joel. Are we considering at all the possibility of bringing in at least a few experts to help us package or repackage or refine some of these offerings? We did a wonderful job, and I know we did it in a very short period of time, but this is not in our wheelhouse. we've got a wonderful faculty with great teachers and great administrators, but this is a little different. And now I think as we reflect on it, does that call to mind maybe the need to bring some experts in?
I think that's a great point, Mr. Sears. And I think part of it is the commitment that we have to make that decision to invest some dollars into generating a program such as that. I know we've been consulting with early in the process when we began the investigation before COVID came. We were looking at some outside programs and some consortiums to see how they began their programs and how they rolled that out. I would say recently we haven't investigated that as an option, but I think that's certainly something we need to look more closely at.
But I would agree. We did talk about how it really deserves a business plan and a marketing plan and the whole thing. That's just something that we have to long range keep our eye on and move toward.
Well, the fruit that's hanging out there, maybe not so low hanging at this point, are the kids that are draining the couple $1 million in cyber tuition from the district. And I think that we want to make sure that's front of mind to get them back. Top of mind. How about that?
There we go.
Get them back.
Well said.
And I have one more question, if I may, Steve. With regard to the BYU courses, is it the long-range plan to bring those back in-house? Like, I don't know, I'm throwing it out there, music theory or art appreciation or whatever these BYU courses are that we have used, eventually they will become York Suburban courses? Or is that not monetarily feasible at the moment? What's the thought on that?
I can comment, and I'd certainly love to hear Dr. Ellis comment as well. I would say long-term, absolutely. We want to create a program that's 100% York Suburban curriculum, but developing that with that level of certifications and I'll say robust collection of courses is absolutely going to take time for each individual to build the course, then have a facilitator of the course. And as that course becomes facilitated, how is that then linking to an existing, like you mentioned, let's say a family consumer, let's say business, because businesses, we have a business department of one. If we're going to expand our business electives, how are we pulling those classes in preparations for Mr. Wilson to prepare those classes? What does that look like as he bleeds them into the system? So I would say long-term, yes. Time, I think, will be one of the hinges. I also think, and I'm going to ask Dr. Ellis to comment, that this does give a greater depth to our course catalog by having some courses that in a small district we just can't offer. So this does provide courses that are not been part of the suburban curriculum, but give students a greater choice and agency in that options. And I'll kind of kick it over to Dr. Ellis to see if he wants to comment on either one of those two.
Sure. I mean, Dr. Krauser shared most of what I would have shared to that question. I mean, we have nearly 150 offerings in the high school. So just the practical nature of being able to implement all of those online and to go through the refinement process, it will be a very long time. He mentioned the business department, applied technology would be another one. He teaches 8 different courses a year and he's one teacher. So for him to turn those into those courses would be a challenge, but in time we would love to do that. But I do think the one real appealing piece of BYU that I've heard anecdotally from families is it expands our offerings, as Dr. Krauser said. So whereas we're limited to those 150 courses, there's other things that students have been able to engage in, particularly in the career and technology areas and some of the career preparation. Students doing some things with auto mechanics and various technical things, forensic science, things that we would love to be able offering, but we're just too small of a school to be able to. So I think the goal would be to try to turn all of our courses into BYU courses, but then still have the ability to expand our offerings through a partner such as them. And there's others out there as well that we'll explore.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And
Steve, just one other thing here, and I found the comment before, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, that you were very quick to equate parents being satisfied with the quality of education that their children are getting and the quantity or whatever. Some of that has to be measured in other ways. So I'm not so anxious. I believe me, it is known I am not a charter school fan, but in reality, being satisfied with something doesn't always mean that it's the best, or we as a district are getting the biggest bang for our buck. I think, parents have to look at charter school for more traditional charter and cyber charter schools for other reasons. So I think you have to be careful how you describe what the parents are satisfied with or not satisfied with, or I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll just, I apologize. I see Dr. Sten was on there. I couldn't see my sidebar. I didn't know if he had a comment. I was speaking for the middle school there in the beginning, but I'll defer to him if he had anything else to add to the conversations regarding top.
No, the only thing I would add, I mean, everybody hit on it. As we started the process, we were pulling together a program pretty quickly, and I think the best part about having Wednesday with our teachers has been able for them to continue to work together and to collaborate on that. And so, if you would compare what we're preparing here for the fourth marking period to what we did in the first marking period, you would notice a very notable difference on what we are providing. Some of that goes back to what Dr. Krauser was also mentioning with the amount of face-to-face time. When he first brought the survey data to me, it didn't surprise me to see that result because I knew that was going to be the case because we were using that time to create the material. Teachers then started to integrate that starting in the second marking period and now definitely in the third marking period. So I would be really curious to see the data result at the end of the year as a true reflection of somebody who had been in there from start to finish, whether they saw that adjustment.
Any other questions? Okay, with that being said, I'm going to move to item number 2 on the agenda, which is the high school. We have one recommendation item, which is from Dr. Ellis, and then 2 discussion items, which are follow-up from prior meetings. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ellis to talk about the high school concurrent enrollment expansion. Dr. Ellis, are you still with us?
And I'm the foolish one that was talking. At least I wouldn't go 2 hours like the professor supposedly somewhere did, talking without unmuting themselves. So sorry about that. And normally it gives you a warning, so I don't know why it didn't warn me of that fact. But just speaking, this is our 6th year of concurrent enrollment at the high school. Concurrent enrollment is the opportunity for students to go to York College, HAC, and/or Penn State York to earn credits towards their college experience, as well as also counting them here at the high school. The program has worked very well. I shared some of the data, the anecdotal data in terms of our student performance. And we always say to the students in school that they may feel like small fish in a big pond here at York Suburban, but when they get off to college next year, they'll recognize how big of a fish they actually are. And I think that's very evident of it, especially as many of these students that are earning these A's and B's at the college are not necessarily our honors level, high achieving, distinguished honors students. There's a lot of our CP students are good, solid students. They're going to do awesome in college, but they don't necessarily feel they're as successful as they really are. But as we've talked about the program, as we've seen new things develop over the last 6 years, we wanted to expand the program a bit from the limited offerings that we provide students and options. So there are a number of brief proposals that we wanted to share and to get your blessing with as a proposal for how we change concurrent enrollment. The first piece is we want to allow students to do as much concurrent enrollment as they want, but we also want to put a minimum benchmark to say if you're going to be a York Suburban graduate, you still need to do a certain amount of York Suburban work. So the first piece would require at least 20 York Suburban High School credits towards graduation. So that's 6 a year plus a couple others along the way, the first 3 years, and then as many as you want senior year. And then they can do all the additional credits and extra credits they'd like at concurrent enrollment if they wish to do that. The second piece is, in my mind, the most important to us because we've seen the interest of students in other places is allowing us to go outside the boundaries of the 3 local schools to allow students to pursue some other offerings. We've actually had some students simply leave school and go to these other schools that I mentioned there to get credits, although they did not count for us. So there are a number of other local schools that broaden our horizon, in some cases beyond the traditional college environments that we're used to, such as Thaddeus Stevens in Lancaster, Pennsylvania College of Art and Design, and Lancaster Bible College. We had a student that went there for a couple classes last year. He had enough high school credits that he could do that. We would like to expand the offerings to those local in-person schools, but then also certainly with the proliferation, and we were just talking about it with TOP here at the high school, is the proliferation of online courses. Certainly almost every school that our students are going to go to in the future have an online program and an online opportunity. And if those students know where they may be going or likely going, and they have an opportunity to do an online course from there, I think it makes sense to allow them to do that rather than forcing them to do an online course from one of our local institutions. So for instance, a student that wants to go to the University of Pittsburgh has applied, is likely to be accepted. If they can do an online course through University of Pittsburgh, to embrace that and allow that to happen. Of course, with the caveat that we always have the administrative approval to shut down something that is not appropriate. And the last provision in this recommendation is to take our 4th English credit. The way it was originally written is that the students could only count it towards their 9 elective credits, but we would like to offer the opportunity that their 4th English credit could be taken at a college or a university in this capacity as a means to offer more variety to our students. Right now, our students really only have one option. They can do their senior year English, although if they're students that really enjoy language arts, they can do the English seminar course. But there's a lot of other offerings in language arts beyond just the traditional senior English that our students may want to pursue. So we'd like to offer that as an opportunity to them for their 4th credit. So that outlines what we're proposing, and certainly happy to answer any questions about our current program or the proposal.
Thank you. Questions?
I have a question. I'm assuming, Dr. Ellis, this doesn't take a lot of administrative time and is easily followed by the guidance department, I'm assuming, to handle all these comings and goings. And I'm always concerned, about the administrative time that all this takes.
Yeah, certainly. Really, the only administrative time it takes is me signing a piece of paper, and I'm just curious a lot of times to see what the students are doing. The counselors do filter all the requests to make sure they're legitimate, make sure that they're going to fit well with their educational plan. So they do the lion's share of that work. And it's part of their natural conversation of senior year scheduling that is happening anyway.
And it's not that much more of a burden to keep track, make sure it's noted on the transcripts and all this kind of stuff,
No, it's just something that's entered into the computer, just like a student that transfers to the high school. And then we just have one counselor that takes that responsibility. And the colleges all email us a summary of all the student results. So we don't even have to track down each individual child for that purpose.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Talk to me about the change in the English department. Run that by me again.
Sure. I mean, certainly in our graduation requirements, English language arts is the only one that has 4 required courses. Certainly math, science, and social studies students only need 3, and then all the other credits count towards electives. What we felt is just because of our goal of trying to expand our English department offerings and offer more things in terms of our elective pieces, that one of the constraints that we have is that senior year English course. The students have already reached mastery of language arts prior to that senior year. So that senior year, it's not disposable because we want students to continue with language arts, but we'd like to give them more offerings than we can individually offer. We basically have a bit of a world literature course with some college transition experiences, and that sort of is what is offered to students senior year here. Whereas at a college and institution, that a student could study Eastern literature, they could study poetry. They could do a technical writing class if they're going to be a math or science major to do something outside of the things that we would typically offer. So that's why we would like to offer that as an option. We don't expect a lot of students necessarily to take it, but it would possibly free up some of our students to have a different experience and also allow us to free up a little bit of staffing to offer some of the other things we'd like to offer to our students.
My only concern is rigor. I'm aware of students who have done you know, a college class because it was easier than what they would get from the old guard English teacher,
Yeah.
which I very affectionately and warmly call our English department.
Yeah.
So that's my hesitancy, that we obviously require that 4th year of English for a good reason.
Yeah. And that's certainly very resonant to mine. And I've talked with the department about that. That's where me as a filter becomes very, very important, as well as the counselors. We're not going to simply approve freshman composition or freshman literature in some of those pieces, because we're going to assume that they've already mastered that. Even something like American literature, they've already had as a junior year. So when we look at the syllabus and the experience, we'd have to be sure that it's substantially different than what we've asked of our students, and that the rigor would be on par with that. So that's part of the filtering process that would be on me to do.
I like that better than earlier. I understood you to say, basically, I'm just going to initial the paper. So I like that better.
Yeah, this is a different piece of that. And even when I'm initialing the paper, the assumption is that they're doing something they have not done before in the high school. So the only offerings I'm seeing are things they haven't done before. English is one place where we'll have to give a little bit more scrutiny to that.
Yeah. Okay. I like that better. Thank you.
I'd like to second, Lois Ann's comment in that respect. That I mean, I think this is all great, but I certainly encourage internal standards of determining rigor across the board, not just English. But that it's an actual process of really determining that it passes standards according to your judgment, and it can be sometimes difficult, I think, to draw those lines, but to make the effort to do so.
No, certainly I will do that. And that's one of the rationales for the minimum of 20 York Suburban credits. So that establishes that minimum baseline that everyone must do prior to some of these other experiences.
Brian, have we ever denied a credit for somebody who's taken one of these college courses?
Not that have been passed. I mean, certainly there's been students that have failed courses, so we don't count those. But I have never turned away one of the requests that's been made, because it's always been comparable to what we would expect students here at York Suburban to do. It may be in some cases easier, in some cases it may be harder, but it is certainly different than they would have done here.
Thank you.
But by opening it up, it's conceivable that some students would make requests that would require some serious reflection on your part.
Yes.
Now, I didn't notice, maybe it's there, that it has to be an accredited university. I don't know if you've actually written that in.
I didn't use the word accredited, but I did reference that we will only accept it from institutions where our students have previously gone, or where that student has already been accepted. So we have that basis of already having some legitimacy in terms of the schools that they're requesting from. We could certainly add the accredited language as well. That would make everyone more comfortable.
Any additional questions for Dr. Ellis regarding this?
Just a question as far as tuition. That's the responsibility of the parents, I'm assuming, any tuition and other expenses at the college?
Yes, all expenses are incurred by the students.
Okay, thank you.
What action do you need from us, Brian?
This would be a
proposal.
recommendation. Yeah.
Yeah, this would be a recommendation from you to go before the full board for a vote at the next meeting, or even in March. The timeline on this is not as
I see.
to me.
So should we make an action here, whether the committee members support this recommendation?
Yeah, we don't meet again until April.
Okay, so does everyone on this committee support a recommendation?
Joel, yes.
Joel, yes, okay.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. We'll say that's a recommendation.
Okay, thank you. The next item is a discussion item. Again, Dr. Ellis, the high school. One is a follow-up from the prior conversations regarding the A+ added to the grading system, and then more of an open discussion we had prior regarding year long. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Ellis first on the new grading system.
Thank you, Dr. Krauser. The first document that is there is the question of whether or not to include A+ in the grading system. Certainly appreciate your support of the proposal to move to a letter system that we're going to put in place for next year. And I'm excited to see how that influences what we do at the school. But you had raised the question of the A+. So this is my research into the question. Honestly, and I'll be full disclosure, my information is largely both sides. There are positives and negatives to inclusion as well as exclusion. And pretty much everything that I could propose, I could see positives and negatives from it. So really, it does become more of a discussion and to see where your sentiments are. The one piece, and just go through the various pieces of information in the document, if we were to include an A+, it really would have a very negligible effect. Any individual A+ would have a very negligible effect on ultimate GPAs. So it's not likely going to make or break someone as the valedictorian or salutatorian. And certainly now that we don't have class rank in our lower levels and lower grade levels, it really won't make a whole lot of difference there. I look at whenever we have these kind of questions, I always go out to one of the lists such as US News and World Report or Niche or one of those other pieces to identify some of the top schools. And there you can see a summary of the top 15 schools in Pennsylvania. And I'll put top in quotation marks, but you can see there's a lot of different formats and a lot of different structures. There doesn't seem to be a best practice for whether or not to include an A+. More do not include it than do, but there are a number that do have the A+ system there. I also went back and looked at our grades over recent years. And I actually went back to 2018-19 because last year, because of how we handled the fourth marking period, was not a real fair assessment of how students would do. But you can see how the grades break down. And one of the interesting things I found is that A+ are very rare in our traditional core content areas, in our math, science, English, social studies. The vast majority of our A+ grades come from our related arts and our elective classes. So there may be merit to putting the A+ in place because it may incentivize students to take more offerings in those areas, but then that also would add the drawback of possibly pulling some students from the other courses they're offering. So that's one of the two sides of it. So I tried to put out at the bottom a little bit of pros and cons and so forth that may imply. There certainly are students in the high school that will be incentivized to get perfect performance. There are students that want that 97, 98, 99, and they're going to work harder to get it. I believe Mr. Schrader talked a little bit about that particular piece. But with that extra effort comes stress and less time that they're spending on other things in their lives. So what is that trade-off of the student trying to aspire to get A+ in all their courses, as opposed to using some of that other time to whether it's having a job or participating in an activity and so forth. So you have that trade-off. I still remember one of my first professor, who was actually my college mentor and so forth. He said one of the first things, and it shocked me, is that I don't award A+ because if you had an A+ in my class, you probably knew more when you walked into it than you learned in the class itself. And that's not always true, but there is some place to say that some of our students just do not necessarily have the aptitude when they start a course to reasonably get an A+. And whereas some students can simply cruise to that sort of effort and so forth. That's a broad generalization, but is an A+ really the product of effort, or is it more aptitude, and is it fair to include it? You can talk both sides of that particular piece. And I referenced the idea, does A+ redirect the course priorities of students? There's certainly the possibility that those students that are incentivized to get the best grades they possibly can may choose to take the classes that they perceive they can more easily get an A+. Whether or not we want that to happen, that's on both sides. And the other piece in terms of college admissions, it's probably not likely going to have a major impact, but certainly colleges, when they look at our transcripts and they look at our student performance, they want students to take the most challenging courses and get the best grades possible. So if an A+ is available when a student gets it, it's certainly going to benefit them. But if an A+ is available when students don't get it, it may be a small little ding on their application. But again, it's two sides of a coin. I don't know that it'll make a huge difference in terms of how we go forward, but I wanted to share the various information with you.
Thank you. Questions?
Brian, do you have a preference?
My preference would be no. And simply, I look at it as much from the social emotional piece of our students and trying to encourage them to be as well-rounded as possible. I'd rather that student that has a 95% in the class focus some of their efforts on other things and broaden their horizons, as opposed to trying to work towards that other piece.
Well, thank you for the research. I think I was sort of the stick in the mud who questioned it, and I appreciate your research. I guess my hang up, if I'm going to be able to get a B+, I ought to be able to get an A+. And that's just sort of where I'm coming from. It's honestly not a hill I'm going to die on. I appreciate your candor and your position, and I don't really see a reason not to, but it's I respect what you're saying, and thank you for your research.
You're welcome.
Other comments?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, and I'll echo, I appreciate the research, but there are a certain percentage of students out there that while you're saying that get a 95, you're fine, go focus on other things. Well, that's not what they want to do. They want to get the highest grade possible. I don't know how many students are available out there that want to do that, but it's kind of like that top 1 or 5% of athletes out there. They want to get to be the top of the mountain. So I don't see a harm in having an A+ hang out there, knowing that, look, you've got to be good and then be even better than that, especially in your core courses. So anyway, that's my point of view.
Other thoughts?
Steve Sullivan here. I guess a question I have is, I don't know when the next CTC meeting is, but I'd be interested to know whether there were any opportunities to get any student feedback, since apparently we're surveying students about whether they want to come back to school 4 days a week. Maybe we could ask them about something like this as well.
I'd be certainly happy to do that.
Okay, that's interesting to me. I mean, I guess I would say that, there might be this slight cultural impact one way or the other. I mean, I think there is something, and whether it's good for the school or not depends. It's hard to answer that abstractly. It depends on what, impacts it has psychologically across the board. And that's a little bit hard to say. So with that said, in keeping with Stephen's remark, it strikes me that it could be useful to know what teachers think on this, because they're probably the closest to it, in terms of whether they think it's a good idea. I mean, that strikes me as interesting. I mean, but I would say that I don't feel that that's necessary, but that would be useful, I think, were you wanting to get to the bottom of whether it's good for the school or not. I think the people closest to the ground would be the best to make the judgment. I mean, I do share, sort of abstractly speaking, the idea that we're truly a rare award. It could be useful for some students to have that as an achievement. But I say that in the abstract. And so, hearing your remarks is interesting. We're students to offer some remarks from teachers, and then there might be this all things considered way of how it might impact things a little bit culturally. But I'll share my own view that I'm deferential to the recommendation that the district gives. I think they're best positioned to be able to have a view on this.
Well, as a member of the committee, I'll weigh in if I may. As far as A+ goes, I support Dr. Ellis's position, but if we really feel that strongly about it, instead of giving the letter grade A+, why don't we award an academic medal or a crown or a tiara or something like that, something that somebody can see so that a student can wear it.
Thanks, Rich.
It's time to order graduation awards, so I can add a few extra things into that particular list. But to a degree, there is recognition for students when they earn A+. Those are the teachers that students go to get the letters of recommendation from. They're the ones that are oftentimes doing those extra steps that the teachers are doing on behalf of those students because of that recognition that came in. But certainly your point is well taken.
Any other judgments or thoughts to share on this issue?
And as long as we're going around the committee, I'll keep it short. I would defer to Brian as well, but my leaning is to add the plus. I like the symmetry of it. I like the idea that there is something for those kids that go for it. And I think we have the horsepower in our counseling departments all the way through to help kids understand that they don't have to kill themselves just to get a grade. But there are those that really want that plus, and I think we should offer it.
Okay, well, that was interesting. And do I take where to go from here is that you'll report back maybe with some more information, and then and then in a future meeting we'll make a decision. Is
Yep,
that?
no, I certainly will be happy to do that. I'll gather some more. I've had some informal conversation with teachers, but I can formalize that piece and also reach out to some students to get their sentiments regarding that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Skelet. The second item coming from the high school for discussion would be the year-long grading, which Dr. Ellis had kind of briefly touched on prior. I think now we'll get a little bit more deeper analysis on that.
This topic is one, this is sort of one that we could be on the cutting edge with and so forth. This is not something that necessarily is being done a lot of places, but one of the challenges since we had Heidi Hayes Jacob here a couple years ago is to think about our system and our school system and to consider some of the structures that are in place. And we look at the ideas, those things that are classical, those things that are contemporary, that are new, but then also some of those things that are antiquated and that we can question and wonder whether or not we actually are doing the best for our students. And one piece that you certainly know, I'm a numbers guy and a percentages guy and all those types of things that I've always questioned was the idea of marking period grades. It's certainly something I remember my report cards as an elementary student and bringing them home and so forth, the teacher writing all the pieces onto it. And I certainly understand why report cards listed or existed for many, many years. They were there so that families would learn how students are doing. And they'd find out 4 times a year or maybe 8 times a year if there were interim reports. But that whole idea of reporting how students are doing is no longer really relevant because we have 24/7 access to the grade books through Infinite Campus. So the question becomes, are we really still getting that benefit from that system, or are we actually running into constraints because of it? And I would suggest we're running into more of that idea that it proposes constraints. And I put a couple of the rationale and a couple of the pieces there, some of the struggles and challenges that go in. The one that sticks with me most is that as a teacher, I always expected students to be doing much more significant work in the 4th marking period because they've learned 3 marking periods worth of material from me. They're now applying it to more advanced concepts, more advanced structures, and so forth. Yet the things that they did in the 4th marking period counted the same as what they did in the 1st marking period. I also remembered those times and so forth. I used the example when if you have 10 tests, how do you evenly divide those among the 4 marking periods so that one test isn't worth more than another one? I live the challenges with the English teachers who are trying to grade term papers and squeeze them in at the end of the marking period, or trying to adjust dates and so forth just to try to get things on an arbitrary timeline just so it fits. Whereas if we're looking at something that we're grading throughout the entire year, we don't have that constraint. Students can place, or teachers can place things where they are most appropriate for them. So there are some trade-offs and some of the negatives and so forth. It is nice at times to have benchmarks where everything is complete. So we'd look to have to try to do something different with that. But this is an idea that we've been floating around the high school faculty since we started talking about these ideas of what's antiquated, what's classical, what's contemporary, and thinking that this may be a better way to do it, much like college and universities do it and other institutions do it, as opposed to having these arbitrary benchmarks. So it really was put out there to be a discussion. It is something that we would like to pilot, if not completely building wide in some specific places, to gather some more information about how this works and how it influences what students do and what teachers do, because there's not a whole lot of information out there about it. But that's why I wanted to bring it all to you for your thoughts and your feedback.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
It's Joel. Brian, I like the idea that we do have the ability to do continuous measuring or evaluation. So my question is, how is that actually being used by parents? Can you tell us that people really are taking advantage of Infinite Campus during the course of a marking period to see what's going on? Do the kids use it? Are there mid-course corrections that are visible to the teachers?
like anything else, it seems there are students that use it far too regularly and parents that use it far too regularly, and there's others that do not do it nearly enough. There are parents that will call teachers 10 minutes after something is posted at 12 o'clock in the day, whereas, and you can even set it up so it sends you alerts on your phone every time an assignment's graded. And there's others that were having this conversation. How did you not know how your child was doing? I would say more often than not, people are using it appropriately. And certainly students monitor and track their grades well within it. So they are well aware of how they're doing throughout the year. But I do think in the absence of actually changing or in the absence of having true report cards, it would be important on our part to still do some kind of traditional reporting to parents in a different fashion. Our report cards now are done online. So nothing is physically going home to parents other than a letter, a warning letter, sometimes if students are doing poorly. So I think we would need to double down a little bit on how we do that information and that notification, just not necessarily with a report card.
And I know many of the courses are continuous and you would expect growth through the year. But my recollection of my time in high school, for example, was that things like industrial arts were not that progressive. They were broken down into skills. And, you know, you might go through mechanical drawing in the first half of the marking period and then some wood shop in the second marking period. And they weren't really that tightly combined. Is there a way to deal with those kinds of things? The discontinuities in the curriculum.
Right. I don't know that we have a whole lot of those sort of topics kinds of courses where students participate in a lot of different areas. I think the vast majority of our courses, including applied technology, build and scaffold in many cases to a final project at the end of the year, which is supposed to pull together much of that learning.
Thanks.
But we still do have some courses that are one semester. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And those would just run on a semester grade, like a college or university.
I wonder if you could speak to the concept that an advantage of having more discrete marking periods is that the slate is wiped clean so that a student has this feeling of a fresh start, that, you know, so there's always a new day. Now, if it's just one long year, there's never a new day. So I'm wondering if you could just address that, you know, that feature of it, and whether that argues for, if you want to pilot this idea, not to go full year right off, but, you know, maybe go from 4 to 2 rather than from 4 to 0. But if you could address this general concept of that advantage and how you think about that.
Certainly that exact comment, that idea of maybe going 4 to 2 as well, is something we talked about in our leadership team meeting and some other pieces. There is certainly a nice feeling. Some of those students that have struggled very much within a course of a marking period, to be able to simply start fresh with a brand new grade book, it is appealing to the students, although it is an artificial feeling, because what has actually happened is that grade has now been locked in, as opposed to something that they can then modify. So that 40% they got in the first marking period is locked in, and it will be averaged on later on. So they're still having to work to overcome that, to try to work to a higher level. Fortunately, the majority of our students are generally successful. They don't necessarily need a clean slate. So I think that's one of the advantages that moving this way would do. It also will mitigate some on the other end, the opposite end, where students get complacent and so forth, because they know their first 3 marking periods they've done well and they don't need to maintain it, because they now have a minimum to be able to get to the finish line without doing a whole lot of work. So there is that particular trade-off. But the one piece that this year, and we say all in all with COVID and so forth, that we're learning new ways to try to approach pieces. One of the things I've been most proud of my faculty this year is looking at ways of trying to help students overcome their difficulties and failures, and even going back in time right now to help students go back and redo some of the things that they did poorly on, to try to improve their grades, to learn the content so they're more successful as the year goes on. And I think one of these pieces, by removing these benchmarks in those cases where the students needed a clean slate, the teachers have more incentive now to go back and to help that student to recover their grade by going back in time, as opposed to going back into prior marking periods, if that makes sense in terms of what I'm saying. So that is one of the drawbacks of not having that clean slate, but I think it's something we can overcome as we work with the students.
Mhm. Other comments?
I would just say that I'm sure that you guys would be able to figure out the best way, but again, it's going to take some communication and some shifting of paradigms and some of those things to get people to really use the Infinite Campus, because it's like, oh my gosh, how can my kid be failing when they've had all that information at their fingertips but haven't accessed it? That makes it that much, more serious that they pay attention. So, I mean, to me, in my mind, it's just a matter of communication.
Well, if I could jump in there, Lois Ann, as a parent of somebody that has Infinite Campus, or I have Infinite Campus access, it can be a little bit frustrating in terms of the communication with the kids, because I'll see those failing grades and then they'll say, well, they haven't updated the grades yet, or they haven't done that. And when it sits there for quite an extended period of time, it becomes somewhat of a battle between the parents and the students, because, look, I mean, I want to blame my kids, but I also know that they're kids and they're not going to always be totally forthright with what's going on. So my suggestion, okay, because we have so many different platforms sitting out there, and I'm sure the teachers don't want to have 1,000 different emails coming in, would be if there's some type of comment section in Infinite Campus to say, hey, look, I have a placeholder for this grade. I haven't loaded it in. It looks like zeros, or something to explain. The technical term is a squirrely grade sitting in there. Would I think would work monumentally well with parents who are looking at their kids' grades on somewhat of a regular basis, and make dinner happier.
Yeah.
Certainly understand. Yes, I can suggest that to the teachers.
Dr. Ellis, how does this fit in with sending transcripts and what have you to college choices, excuse me, or other post high school, institutions and things like that? I mean, I'm old enough to say I remember when college was a full year course. High school, no way. We got 4 report cards and we got attitude grades and got all kinds of stuff. Best report cards I ever got were the elementary ones, because the teachers wrote a paragraph about everything you were doing, reading, math. So they were probably the best report cards, which we don't do anymore. I'm just curious how they will look upon this when it comes January of senior year, and you got to send off the final transcript to see if they're going to get accepted in April. I don't know. I don't know if these kids are mature enough to understand.
Yeah, that's certainly.
Not all of them, but.
Yeah, that'll be part of the educational piece that will need to happen with the students. Certainly the initial transcript that goes out typically in the fall is going out based upon junior grades, as well as a list of what the students are taking. We're not sharing any information until mid-year. But traditionally, once the mid-year report cards are issued, that's when we send that information out. So we will need to have a benchmark place where everything is up to date, so that students understand that they need to be up to date as of, whether we say January 15th or whatever that day of the marking period, and then a period of time where teachers from seniors are locking in those grades so that we can fairly and reliably send those out. We don't want to have a situation where the student was absent and currently has a 0 on a test or something that happened to be there, and then it looks like they have a C in a course instead of a B+ or an A. So that will be on us to put a little window in place to ensure that those grades are reflected accurately. But basically, we would just have to tell them, just like the 18,000 schools that are sending kids off to college have 18,000 different systems, we would simply have to explain our system to them and say that this is an in-progress grade, but it's representative of work through half of the year.
And that would be part of that, was it trifold thing that kind of
Yes.
goes out to colleges, something like that. Obviously digitally, because I'm assuming everything is sent digitally now that you're no longer
Vast
sending.
majority is, yes.
Interesting. I have to think about this. At this point, I don't know. I'm just trying to think back to my kids, which I try not to do, but how they would have accepted something like this. Thank you.
Just an interesting comment. While I see 2 slightly different things in Brian's proposal, one of which is the idea of having that cumulative grading, that each marking period does not stand on its own, but all your scoring is cumulative throughout the year. And that's actually not something new at York Suburban, because in elementary, we're actually doing that in math. And in math, despite the fact that we report out 4 times, we do use that cumulative grading that, you know, your scores from the entire year form one final grade.
Thought that that I'll share is to me like the discussion about an A+. This is this change is a change that is right in the wheelhouse of our experts, the teachers. It's like, you know, what I mean, on the face of it, I would think teachers would would think that this would be helpful, because those 4 marking periods is a kind of a bureaucratic. It becomes an artificial line at which you then have to adjust learning modes and learning modules. And you have to think it, and so it's a cart and a horse issue. But that's just my own. It would be interesting and helpful to know both, you know, how the teachers would get behind it or whether they support it. And it strikes me that their input on a change like this, I would find highly useful.
And the teachers certainly are behind this. This is one that we have much more actively explored with the leadership team. So we've been talking about this for about a year now, just discussing the piece, and the universally the leadership team is on board with this particular piece. And the assumption is they've been talking with their departments and relaying that information back.
Okay, any other questions? I see we're at 6:16 and we still have another agenda item. So I'll keep moving this forward unless.
Are we to vote on that topic?
I take it this was just informational for today?
Correct.
Yes.
I think our plan would be to, you know, as discussion item 1, you asked Dr. Ellis to get some additional information, continued vetting, and I think we'll come together at their next meeting with either a recommendation or the next step in that pilot process as he gathers some information. Am I correct there, Dr. Ellis?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. All right, great. The next item is the item that we have for the, I'm going to share my screen here real quick. This task that we received from the Property and Finance Committee. So I'm going to kind of pick up and do a little walkthrough on some of the conversations and kind of pick up a little bit where Mrs. Chichuli left off. She introduced this concept of a crossroad where during the Property and Finance Committee, we spent time discussing the fiscal responsibilities and the structural deficits and these issues and or larger overarching concerns over time that we want to tackle. And then the study that was delivered also introduced, I believe what we can agree has been a conversation for quite some time regarding our facilities and what our responsibilities are to address some of the aging structures in our facilities, mechanicals, et cetera. So as Mrs. Chichuli mentioned, we're at a crossroads. And from that crossroads, the committee put forth a set of strategic principles that were bounced up to the board, and the board then kicked to us to deliver an educational model that aligns to those strategic principles. So my hope this evening is to kind of pick that up in 2 folds. Number 1, present to you a long-term process which embraces the strategic principles plan to address an instructional model K-12, as well as a follow-up to the short-term process. And that was a very specific question from that meeting. Mr. Tillman isn't here this evening, but he asked the question to go back to the original numbers when the elementary division and Dr. Williams shared about original footprint redesign and is realignment possible using our projection numbers. At projection levels, we were running into hurdles. Mr. Tillman asked us to reassess that at current levels, not assuming a projection, but using our current enrollment numbers based on that. So I want to address these 2 items this evening. So the first one is the long-term plan. For this process, developing a K-12 instructional recommendation, our destination is the same. It's the same vision that we have for the York Suburban School District. It's our kind of end in mind that we keep track on. Our journey, our footpath, our process for that in moving forward remains the same as our mission with Inspiring a Bold Future. The board provided us with this new map. using these 5 strategic principles, both through an instructional lens as well as a physical plant and fiscal lens, to develop a K-12 instructional program that allows us to embark on a recommendation coming out of the Academic Standards Committee. So we have the map, now we're instituting the plan. So what I'm sharing with you this evening is working with the administrative team to embrace this request to develop a plan. We've organized a timeline plan that I'm going to share with you. Our first step in this process is to begin the stakeholder engagement. And if you remember from the meeting, this process is really for us to think about an instructional model. This is not necessarily a architectural design. We're not getting really into buildings, etc., and learning spaces, all that. We're asking to gather information from our stakeholders that what would put together a proposed K-12 ideal instructional model. So our first step will be a survey process that will survey staff, students, and parents. In addition, we will institute a process of focused theme groups. The theme groups will be broken down into 2 parts, a K-5 group and a 6-12 group, facilitated by principals, Sherry Campbell, Tom Ketterman, and myself. We will lead the focus groups on these 5 theme areas: curriculum instruction, culture and climate, student and community engagement, equity, and structures. They're the big themes that we've seen when we see about educational structure systems or educational K-12 program designs are using these 5 themes, which are critical components to that. So through the month of March, we will solicit the feedback through both surveys and focus groups. Then later into the month of March, the team of administrators will come back together, analyze that feedback against current educational research for instructional designs, K-12. From there, synthesize that into a proposal that we would return back to the draft to this committee at our next committee meeting in April. And from there, that first board meeting in May, which would recommend that proposal to May. So the purpose of this would be a long-term instructional model. What would it look like, over the next 5 to 6 years if we could bring to fruition a high-functioning K-12 instructional model? That addresses the long-term process that we've been charged with in regards to using the 5 strategic principles to deliver a plan or a recommended plan for instructional model. The second part of the question comes back to Mr. Toman's question and a short-term process using the original footprint. Using the original footprint. Taking the existing numbers, not using projections, so just using original numbers, the question was, what can we apply to our existing footprint within the district? Meaning, can we make adjustments to realize better efficiencies, which result in immediate costs for the organization? And through an analysis of that, the question that we come back for a discussion item out of this group would be, yes, there is an opportunity that we can realize immediate short-term savings using the existing footprint. That would allow us to align the buildings to get multiple grade levels in one building, greater efficiencies in staff, and greater efficiencies in the facilities, as well as opening up that doorway to, having conversations about how this thing springboards to a facilities conversation. So I guess my closure here to spring back the question to you is twofold. Number one, just seeking feedback on our long-term plan to provide a instructional framework K-12 that would work to provide a reorganization and discuss those crossroads of both facilities and finances, and then seek maybe a recommendation from you if you would like us to proceed on making changes within the existing footprint and what that would look like. I'll kick that to see if Dr. Williams or Dr. Ketterman has any additional items to add before I kind of turn it back over for discussion.
Thanks, Dr. Krauser. Yeah, we've been exploring opportunities to be more efficient with our resources, human and otherwise, particularly at the elementary level. At the secondary level, we already have grade level realignment. We already have all 7th graders, 8th graders, 6th graders in one building and all 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders in another building. We don't have that set up anywhere else, and we can get there. It would require us to shift some things around. So we could get from, say, 4 elementaries that we have now down to 3. by shifting grades around to different buildings, and in effect have a K1 building, and then a 2-3 building, and then a 4-5 building. That's doable with the current numbers, because the enrollment projections at the younger grades are not holding true to what had been projected. So we do have the ability to go down that path, and we would have the ability to go down that path come this fall if we were so motivated. So that's where we are right now, and that's what we can pull off. We would need to understand the board's willingness to go down that path, quite frankly.
Okay. Let's see. Well, shall I just open the floor to comments or questions?
Floor open, Steve.
Floor is open.
What choice do we have?
Well, we are facing a multi-million-dollar deficit this coming year and future years. We talk often about a structural deficit. The only way that we can contend with the structural deficit is to maximize our human resources more efficiently. That's the only shot we have at it. The only one. PSERS costs are not going to go down. Utility bills are not going to go down. Nothing's going to go down except our ability to raise funds otherwise. So we truly don't have any choice but to maximize our resources in some kind of grade level realignment, some kind of consolidation. So it's a question of when are we comfortable realizing those savings?
So, Dr. Williams, you mentioned this past year, one of the big benefits has been the ability to collaborate amongst the teachers, which historically, while we talk a good game, I don't know how much benefit we got out of collaboration so much. You know, it seemed to be somewhat disjointed with the two sides of the schools working together. And that's not that they're not trying, it's just when you're physically distant, it's not as realistic. So talk to me about how you see this being a benefit from a collaboration standpoint.
Well, having all of the first grade teachers, for example, just to pick a grade, having them all in one building so that they can share resources and plan together the lessons that they deliver to students is monumental, and eliminates, just absolutely eliminates the possibility that grade 1 in one side of the district might be getting something different than grade 1 on the other side of the district. To me, that's huge. The teachers have all the best intentions of being aligned together. And it can be done with a lot of effort, and they make the effort, but sometimes it's never foolproof. And if they're all in one building, it would be just seamless and customary.
And if I may add to that, from a curricular implementation and analysis, you know, to Dr. Williams' point, it doesn't get any easier than that. Let's use first grade. When the administrator begins at the front of the hallway and can analyze the entire district curriculum in one long walk, you know, there's a lot to be said about that when we talk about how we synthesize curriculum, its implementation, and its effectiveness. So there's a tremendous value in that. And then to the collaboration point, again, as you mentioned, I would agree. You know, we're doing the best we can on two separate sides, but when we begin to talk about curriculum and resources, as Dr. Williams said, they're all there in one piece. Now we can also talk about how we're implementing that curriculum consistently across all of those in one division at one time. And also to add to that, kind of as I shared both the short and long-term process, the decision for longer facility issues are still a conversation. The long-term plan of being able to continue for us to assess what a K-12 instructional system looks like is a parallel path that's still moving. This short-term path may offer additional benefits if necessary, if we needed available resources, if a plan would need you know, swing spaces or movement areas or whatever, both those parallel paths could almost serve each other in a sense.
Yeah, they would complement each other.
I have one thought to add. Going back to the map, I don't know if we could get to the map where it listed some goals. Sure. And this might be a procedural question in part in that, did the board already pass that? Is that a board, or is that, I'm not sure what the status of that is. But when I look at the, under instructional, we have an A and a B, it strikes me as appropriate that there should be a C, which would say something like, apply high standards of educational excellence, that there be some goal that says, you know, one of the reasons driving decision making is that it creates academic excellence, in addition to more access to equitable resources and learning spaces that promote collaboration. So I don't know if it's possible to debate that point or to have that be part of this map, but independent of the procedural question, I'm just going to take that for granted as an important part of this conversation. And what is the role of our committee? I think it's importantly to focus on that. And when I look at this proposal, that's the question I ask. And from that perspective, I'm not sure what the downsides are to the suggestion.
Sure.
So it's hard for me to, you know, it seems like from an educational point of view, this is a good idea. Now there might be these other considerations like busing. You know, that's a serious consideration for many people, but that's not this committee, or I don't know if that's directly an academic question. So the one academic piece that I want to bring up is part of the overall educational experience of a student and their academic achievement is the peers that they develop. And it seems like another potential benefit of this is peer development, who socializing with whom from the get-go, and that the separation of buildings is not necessarily a help educationally. Now there's the equity consideration, yes, but there's also the academic excellence consideration, and that is that it may help with academic excellence overall to have the grades aligned. That's a speculation, but I would like some commentary on this. Are there downsides on the academic excellence side here that I'm not seeing? Otherwise, it strikes me as a good idea from that perspective.
If I may comment to your first question,
yeah.
These strategic principles were approved at the board meeting the prior Monday. But to your point, which is a good one, I will say we don't lose sight of that. Clearly, you can see that our vision continues to drive us about having students be empowered and emboldened to meet those high standards. So our destination remains the same as an academic institution. We haven't lost sight of what our values are, what our primary goals are, and what we want students to achieve when they reach the finish line as a graduating senior. The task that we were charged with from the board, which was a byproduct of the Property and Finance Committee, was to apply these strategic principles along with our end in mind to develop an educational program K-12. So to your question about all of those larger pieces regarding hypothesizing, you know, social motion connectivity, that's exactly where these themes have evolved from and what we'll do as that larger proposal process. The last part of your question in particular, specific to this short-term option, I think that's the purpose of this conversation from an academic standpoint, and the reason why I placed it on here. From an academic viewpoint, it does provide efficiencies and effectiveness on a variety of scales. Does that, of course, have other peripheral responses to it? It does. But I think the hope was through this discussion, the recommendation from an academic lens would be to investigate that short-term option if the board so desires.
So from an academic lens, are there pros and cons? I haven't heard any cons yet.
I would say from an academic lens, there's pros and cons in any institution. But I think from this lens, we're viewing it as the pros. From academically, there's a greater benefit academically this way. You mentioned something like transportation, and I don't know if that's up for the conversation, but I think that's a separate entity.
Yeah, I'm bracketing that out. I'm just saying from the academic quality of York Suburban, by making this change, are there any cons?
I can't think of a single one.
Dr. Williams, would you be able to, by whatever, some future meeting or next meeting, show us how the population works out? K1 in one building, 2, 3, 4, 5, how the numbers work out?
It would be K1 in one building, K1 in one building, 2, 3 in another, and 4, 5 in another.
Can you show me some solid numbers on that? Just numbers, students. How many students does that involve? Break it down.
Sure.
Using current enrollment, just for the heck of it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll get it to your weekly update.
Other questions from the board?
I'm going on the premise that the academic benefits are going to be complemented by the financial benefit that we're not going to go broke. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, that's an extremely fair assessment, perhaps an understatement. In very, very, very simple terms, if we go to 3 buildings instead of 4, we have a vacant principalship right now. There's $200,000 right off the bat without batting an eye. And we're going to realize a whole lot of other savings as well. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
So if I may, I'll amend my original question from what choice do we have to what are we waiting for?
We have to have the will to do it.
So logistically, am I understanding correctly that provided the board is on board, we could institute this for 21, 22?
We could. And what really got us thinking to try to do it this soon is that we do have that vacant principal's position. So if we're to consolidate a year from now, we'd have to rethink how we do that administrative position, because if we have 4 elementaries next year, we can't have a building without an administrator. So we'd have to do something along long-term subline or something. We'd have to do something different. So now is the prime opportunity. And on top of that, we're coming off of a highly unusual school year where nothing is normal.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than go back to something that they perceive as normal this coming year, it might be best to do it now while change is inevitable.
No, it seems like a no-brainer, to be honest with you.
It does. And we didn't make this, we're not making this recommendation lightly. We've gone back and forth on this for weeks. And within the last couple of days, it started to become a no-brainer. That's how it evolved in our thinking. So our recommendation would be to consolidate into 3 buildings at the elementary level.
What actions do you need, Tim, to move forward with that? We've been having conversations like this for as long as I can remember. So what specifically do you need from the board to make this happen?
What would be really nice is if we had a recommendation out of committee to consolidate grade levels at the elementary level and direct the administration to make it happen.
Has this gone to the property committee where that's been recommended?
Well, this is an academic decision.
This is academic, Steve.
But I'm saying, have you put this to the other committee and have they made a recommendation?
Yeah.
My sense is we did make the recommendation, although it was implicit by adopting the strategic principles.
Right.
I got you.
We didn't say this is the specific footprint, but we said you can take this and move forward. Now, academics from the standpoint of what we can do right now, can release this and to say to Tim and the administration, go forward. We will support this. This makes academic sense.
So
And we will maintain both parallel paths. We will continue the longer term investment in what's a truly high functioning K-12 system while we investigate immediate realization in opportunities and efficiencies in a K-5 viewpoint. And then eventually we're going to have to revisit that crossroad again.
okay, so then let me ask the board members, is there anything else you need to know to make a judgment about impacts on academic quality with respect to this change?
I'm satisfied with what we've heard.
Okay,
I
I
don't
would
Get
agree.
moving.
Yeah.
need a motion.
all right, so then I'll take a motion that we recommend. What's the motion that we should?
Consolidation into 3 schools from 4.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
okay, then that was unanimous.
Thank you very much. That's the direction we need. The marching orders, we got them. We'll make it happen.
I'm so glad we're not still kicking this can down the road.
Sounds like you're not alone, Lois Ann.
Just had to put it out there.
Thank you, Lois Ann.
Okay, so moving on.
Any committee chair reports?
No further report.
If there's no information, I do have a public comment. As we've kind of shared before, the public comment does get posted, and with this overlap in meetings from the holiday, we'll share public comment because it was on our listserv, but will also be shared again during public comment at Monday's meeting.
Tom Veronica. Interesting.
All right. Well, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank all those who posted comments. We read them carefully, and we're very interested in your feedback through those comments.
He's going on trial. He's going. Do you understand?
Did everyone have an opportunity to read those?
Yes, thank you.
They will also be shared again at Monday's meeting because it does represent a time period in which the window is open for posting.
Great. Okay, with that said, I believe we've done the public comment. The next meeting is scheduled for April 19th, 2021 at 5 p.m. And among the topics that will be discussed is a draft presentation of what?
Of the K-12 instructional proposal that we're working on that will solicit feedback.
Okay.
And then some updates with our middle school social emotional learning pilot, which we're coming up onto our second semester data. So we'll have some information to share on that as well.
Okay. And I see media literacy is a future agenda item.
Yeah, just given on the volume of the time, we can certainly kind of navigate that as we get closer. If we have room, we'll put that onto that list. But the nature of that size proposal, I wanted to make sure we had discussion time.
Right. And if any board members have other topics you'd like to address, please let me know and I will convey those to Dr. Krauser. With that said, unless there are further objections, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you.